Welcome to today's explainer of the source material. We are going to completely strip away those sensationalized Hollywood myths and dive straight into the actual clinical reality of dissociative identity disorder. Because, when you really look at the data, you realize this isn't just some bizarre anomaly or a scary movie plot. It is, arguably, one of the human mind's most incredible, brilliant defense mechanisms, completely designed for pure survival. So let's jump right in. Here is our quick roadmap for today. We're going to define what DID actually is, explore how trauma splinters the mind, and then take a really close look at alters and the inner system. After that, we'll compare the covert and classic forms, tackle the very real diagnostic challenges, and finally, walk through the three-phase path to healing. All right, part 1. Let's lay the groundwork and establish exactly what this condition is. So, what really is multiple personality disorder? Well, first off, I want you to basically throw out everything you think you know about that old, totally outdated term. Seriously, most people imagine these brand new, fully formed souls just floating in from the outside to take over a body. But the clinical truth? It's far more complex, and honestly, it makes a whole lot more sense. To truly grasp this, we have to start with the absolute baseline process, which is dissociation. Clinically, it's defined as the disruption of the normal integrative processes of consciousness, memory, perception, and identity. Now, dissociation exists on a spectrum. We all experience it, right? Like zoning out during a long drive and suddenly realizing you have no idea how you got home. But the condition we're talking about today takes that everyday process and pushes it to its absolute extreme limit to create a permanent, locked-in survival system. And that extreme survival system relies heavily on something called an alter. An alter is essentially an emotional part of the self split off by trauma, possessing its own reality perception and life experience. Now, what's absolutely crucial to understand here is that an alter is just an emotional fragment of one single person. They might have different ages, totally different handwriting, or distinct names, but they are absolutely not separate foreign entities. They're reflections of a single, unified mind that was basically forced to shatter. So you might be wondering, why don't these fragments just naturally blend back together? Well, the answer is amnesia. This is the loss of memories, facts, and experiences that just cannot be explained by ordinary forgetfulness. Amnesia acts as this massive, impossibly thick psychological wall that hides these different states from the main host. Because of this wall, patients experience these terrifying losses of time. Imagine how incredibly disorienting daily life becomes, filled with memories that everyone else around you seems to recall perfectly, but you simply cannot access. Moving right along to part 2, let's look at the profound root cause of this fragmentation. You see, this disorder is not some random freak glitch in the brain. According to the clinical data, it is heavily rooted in severe early childhood trauma, typically happening before the age of 5. Normally, as a kid grows up, they naturally integrate their experiences into one cohesive personality. But when they're faced with unimaginable abuse, the brain brilliantly hits the brakes and halts that integration. It triggers a literal lifesaver of a process called encapsulation. It takes that unbearable pain, locks it into a completely separate compartment to isolate it, and allows the rest of the child to survive. Part 3. Let's examine the fascinating inner architecture of the mind that takes over. It's happening to them, not me. Man, just think about that for a second. That is the heartbreaking logic behind the creation of a child alter. The core self experiences a trauma so relentlessly heavy that it simply cannot bear it. So a separate, highly specific emotional fragment literally steps forward to absorb the abuse. This incredible sacrifice allows the core self to grow up under the life-saving illusion that the horrors were inflicted on someone else entirely. It keeps the central identity intact. Think of this inner system like a highly specialized, intensely functional corporate team where everybody has a very specific job to do. Child or adolescent alters usually hold the pain and the raw memories. Then you've got protectors and rescuers. They are the tough, brave ones who step in to defend the system from current real-world threats. You also have persecutor alters, who tragically internalize the abuser's voice to punish the self from the inside, and avenger alters, who carry all the immense rage of the past. It is a completely functional distribution of labor, precision-engineered to manage a life built on trauma.
Okay, part 4. How does DID actually show up in the real world?
The media absolutely loves to show the classic form, the dramatic, theatrical Jekyll and Hyde shifts between vastly different personalities right in broad daylight. But in actual clinical reality, that is incredibly rare.
What's way more common is the covert presentation. Most patients desperately hide their symptoms. They experience this implicit passive influence, often feeling like their actions are being steered by an unseen force or that their lives are just slipping completely out of their control. This disorder doesn't scream for attention. It actually excels at hiding.
Part 5. Because it hides so well, finding the right clinical diagnosis is an absolute maze.
5 to 7. That is the astonishing average number of incorrect psychiatric diagnoses a DID patient receives before finally getting the correct one. Because the course system is designed to be hidden, clinicians usually only see the surface-level stuff. Patients are constantly misdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder, severe depression, anxiety, or eating disorders. The true root cause just stays buried under a massive mountain of comorbid conditions. So how do specialists actually crack the code? Differentiating DID from conditions like schizophrenia or from malingering, which is just someone faking it, really comes down to a few distinct telltale markers. A schizophrenia patient typically hears voices originating from the outside world, while a DID patient hears profound internal noise. Someone faking it, they'll exaggerate and actively seek attention, but a genuine DID patient carries deep, profound shame and tries to mask the condition at all costs. Also, interestingly enough, DID patients are highly susceptible to hypnosis. These subtle clinical differences are absolutely the keys to finding the truth.
Finally, Part 6. We reach the rigorous but incredibly hopeful clinical roadmap to unifying the mind.
The journey to piece the mind back together consists of 3 strict sequential phases: stabilization, trauma work, and integration. And this order is totally non-negotiable. Clinicians simply cannot skip ahead because doing so risks re-traumatizing the patient and further shattering their mind.
Let's start with Phase 1, which is stabilization. The most critical rule here is that absolutely zero trauma is touched, period. Actually, the entire focus is purely on safety. Clinicians work to stop self-harm, establish really strict safety agreements, control those immediate chaotic symptoms, and most importantly, foster an alliance. They literally have to build a cooperative internal communication network among the alters, replacing internal hostility with actual teamwork.
Once safety is absolutely rock solid, we move to Phase 2, trauma work. This is where those deeply encapsulated, terrifying memories are carefully, slowly titrated and processed. It is incredibly painstaking work. The ultimate goal here is to take these disjointed, raw flashes of horror and metabolize them. They're trying to transform the trauma from a live, active threat into a coherent, narrative history, something the patient can finally look back on as an event that is safely, permanently in the past.
And that brings us to the triumphant culmination of this entire journey, Phase 3, integration. After years of fighting for control or hiding from each other in the dark, the alters slowly begin to fuse. They synthesize into a single, cohesive, completely stable identity. The incredibly heavy burden of the past is finally lifted, allowing the patient to experience peaceful daily functioning and actually direct their energy toward living in the present and building a real future.
I want to leave you with this final thought. If the human mind is brilliant enough to literally fragment itself into these intricate, flawless pieces just to survive the unimaginable, what incredible heights can it reach when fully unified and healed? The sheer resilience of our brain is absolutely staggering. I really hope this explainer expanded your perspective on the unbelievable mechanics of the human mind. Thanks for joining me today, and keep questioning what you think you know. See you next time.